The first indicator wasn't a blaring alarm or a red flashing screen, but a microscopic discrepancy in the inbound packet sequencing. Jake Mitchell sat in the climate-controlled server room on the 42nd floor of the Chicago high-rise, a space that smelled faintly of ozone and recycled air locked at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold kept his mind sharp, or at least focused enough to tolerate the crushing monotony of corporate network auditing. He leaned back in the ergonomic chair, watching terminal lines scroll in pale green against the black monitor. His job was supposed to be invisible, a 3-month independent security contract to fortify the internal architecture before the quarterly board review. Most days he ran automated scripts, drank mediocre break-room coffee, and ignored the political warfare happening in the executive suites above him. But his eyes caught a stutter in the data stream, a microsecond lag that shouldn't exist. The proxy server on the 39th floor was mirroring outbound traffic to an unauthorized external IP address. Someone was siphoning data from the executive drives, and they'd been careful enough to mask it behind routine update protocols. Jake didn't panic. Panic was for people who didn't understand the machinery. He felt a slow, deliberate waking in his chest, a lethargic engine turning over for the first time in months. The apathy that usually blanketed his thoughts began to lift, replaced by cold, mechanical focus. He isolated the node. The unauthorized access was tunneling directly through credentials belonging to Robert Anderson, Senior Director of Operations. But the target wasn't general financial data or competitive intelligence. The target was the localized drive of Executive Vice President Emily Carson. Jake hit a keystroke to temporarily bottleneck the outbound port, slowing the leak without alerting the intruder that someone was watching. Then he stood up. The problem required physical intervention. He had to pull the hardline from her office to sever the connection cleanly without triggering an automated wipe protocol. He checked his watch. 6:45 in the evening. Most of the floor was empty save for the cleaning crews and the executives who didn't know how to go home. Jake walked to the elevator, the heavy rubber soles of his boots making no sound on the polished concrete. The ride to the top floor was a silent vertical ascent into the rarefied air of mahogany and glass. He stepped out into the executive suite. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the thick carpeting. He navigated the maze of empty assistant desks until he reached the corner office at the end of the hall. The door was open. Emily Carson sat behind her massive oak desk, the Chicago skyline a grid of amber and silver lights behind her. She leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, one knee crossed over the other. She wore a crisp white blouse with the collar open at her throat and a sharp black pencil skirt. Jake stood in the doorway in his faded gray t-shirt, his hands resting in his pockets, the fabric of his jeans carrying the faint dust of the server racks. He was an anomaly in her polished world, a wrench dropped into a glass vase. She looked up from the glowing screen of her laptop. The ambient light caught the exhaustion at the corners of her eyes, a tightness in her jaw that she hid beneath a perfectly calibrated professional mask. But when she saw him, the mask shifted. A tired, genuine amusement softened her features. Her voice came low and melodic, a contrast to the sterile hum of the building. Jake Mitchell, to what do I owe the pleasure of a visit from the basement ghost? Jake didn't step fully into the room yet. He maintained the distance, analyzing the situation. The data leak was active. Every second he stood here, more files were compiling in Robert's shadow folder. But he couldn't just tell her to step away from the machine. If she closed a window or triggered a save state, the malware might execute a deletion protocol. He needed to control the environment first. His voice came flat, devoid of urgency. I need access to your terminal. She arched an eyebrow, tapping a silver pen against her desk pad. Right now, I'm finalizing the quarterly projections for tomorrow's board meeting. The one where Robert Anderson is undoubtedly going to argue that my department is bleeding capital. Right now, Jake repeated. and you need to stop typing." She sighed, a quiet sound of supreme fatigue, and let the pen drop. She looked at him, really looked at him, her gaze tracing the plain gray cotton of his shirt, the relaxed, immovable set of his shoulders. The tension in the room wasn't just digital. It was the quiet friction of two people who operated on completely different frequencies. She was motion, ambition, and perpetual stress. He was stillness, logic, and calculated restraint. Jake pulled his left hand from his pocket and checked his watch again, 6:50. The words came out before he could reconsider them. "I need to leave by 7. I have to pick up my daughter from aftercare." The statement hung in the air, oddly heavy. Emily stopped leaning back. She shifted her weight, uncrossing her legs, and planted her elbows on the desk. Her eyes tracked to his left hand, to the thin gold band still on his ring finger. The question formed slowly, careful. "You're married?" "Widower." The word tasted like ash every time he said it. "Lily is 7. She's waiting for me." Something in Emily's expression cracked. Not pity, but recognition. The kind that comes from understanding what it means to carry weight alone. Her voice softened. "Then go. We'll handle this tomorrow." Jake shook his head. "Can't. The breach is active. Every second they're downloading your files. If I don't stop it now, by tomorrow morning there won't be anything left to protect." Emily's hands stilled on the desk. The color drained from her face as the implications settled. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt once, and stepped to the side. "What do you need me to do?" Jake moved into the space she vacated. The leather of the chair still held the heat of recent use. He didn't sit. He leaned over the desk, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He didn't touch the mouse. He used a series of command-line shortcuts, bringing up the hidden directory trees, layers of code that most executives would never see or understand. Emily stood close to his shoulder, not close enough to touch, but near enough that he could sense the sudden stillness of her breathing. Her voice dropped to a serious, hushed tone. "What is it?" His fingers moved in rapid staccato bursts across the keys. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply working at his baseline speed. "Someone's executing a localized packet capture on your machine. They're mirroring your personal directory to an external server. It's a clumsy zero-day exploit piggybacking on the automated update service." "My personal directory." Her voice tightened. "Jake, my drafts for the restructuring proposal are in there. My performance reviews of Robert's team." "I know." He kept his eyes on the screen. "That's why I'm killing the port." He input the final command string and hit enter. The screen flashed black for a fraction of a second, then returned to her spreadsheet. The outbound data flow dropped to 0. Jake exhaled a short, controlled breath. The immediate hemorrhage was stopped, but the wound was still open. Emily's voice came sharp, urgent. "Did they get it?" Jake pulled up the system log, parsing the raw data. "They got fragments, encrypted blocks. It'll take them a few hours to compile it into anything readable." He stood up straight and turned to face her. "But the protocol constraint is strict. Now that I've severed the connection manually, the localized network security policy automatically initiates a hard lockdown on this terminal. You can't leave, and neither can I. We have to sit here and rebuild the encryption keys from scratch, or the automated system will purge your drive at midnight as a security measure." Emily stared at him. "You're telling me we're locked out of the network unless we stay here and fix it? For how long?" "Until it's done." Jake looked at the digital clock on the wall. 7:15. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed. The line picked up on the second ring. "Marcus, it's Jake. I need you to pick up Lily from aftercare. Tell her Daddy's fighting bad guys at work." The voice on the other end, Marcus Johnson, his oldest friend and the only person in this building who knew anything real about him, came back low and concerned. "Man, you never ask for help. This must be serious." "It is. Jake kept his tone even, professional, but there was a thread of something underneath, something raw. Tell her I'll be home as soon as I can. He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. When he turned, Emily was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite parse. It wasn't pity, it was something closer to respect or maybe disbelief. She crossed her arms. You just sacrificed picking up your daughter to stay here and protect my files. Jake met her gaze. I made a promise when I took this contract. I keep my promises. Emily's jaw tightened. She looked away out at the city lights, and for a moment the executive mask slipped entirely. What remained was exhaustion and something that looked like loneliness. She nodded once, a small dip of her chin. Then let's get to work. Cancel your plans, the date is off. Jake almost corrected her. There was no date, just a 7-year-old girl who needed her father, but he let it stand. The next 3 hours would be a masterclass in tedious grinding precision, and misunderstandings about his personal life seemed trivial compared to the digital battlefield they were about to navigate. He commandeered her secondary monitor, turning the screen vertically to read the cascading lines of hexadecimal code. Emily sat on the small leather sofa in the corner of her office, her laptop open on her knees, working offline on her speech notes. The silence between them was functional, a shared workspace where the only sounds were the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard and the soft rustle of her shifting papers. Around 9:30, the tension in the room began to shift. The adrenaline of the initial breach had worn off, leaving behind the hollow ache of fatigue. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the knots of tension pulling at his spine. He hadn't eaten since noon and his stomach was making quiet protests. Emily's voice broke the silence, flat and observational. You stopped typing. Jake leaned back in the chair. Running a decryption algorithm. It takes 12 minutes to brute force the hash. We wait. Emily finally closed her laptop and set it on the glass coffee table. She stood, stretching her arms above her head. The movement was unself-conscious, betraying her exhaustion. I'm ordering food, Thai or Greek. I don't care. Whatever's fast, she ordered Thai. While they waited, the dynamic in the room settled into a strange domestic quiet. Jake pulled his phone from his pocket to check a message from Marcus, who was asking if the network was stable. He typed a single-word reply, handled, and then deliberately placed the phone face down on the corner of the desk. He pushed it a few inches away. It was a physical boundary. He was here. He was nowhere else. Emily watched the movement. She walked over to the desk and leaned against the edge, crossing her arms. You don't talk much, do you? I communicate when data needs to be transferred. She offered a small, tired smile. And what does the data say about who did this? Jake assessed whether a visual explanation would be clearer. He turned the monitor toward her. Look at this. This is the perimeter. He pointed to the outer boundary on the schematic. The red vectors are the intrusion paths. Notice how they bypass the external firewall completely. The attack didn't come from outside. It was launched from within the network, specifically from a node authorized under Robert Anderson's credentials. Emily looked at the diagram, her eyes tracing the lines. The reality of the betrayal settled over her like a cold wind. He's trying to find the restructuring drafts. He knows I'm recommending his department be cut by 30%. He found the drafts, Jake corrected gently, but they're locked in an encrypted packet. I have the key. He doesn't. The food arrived at 10. They ate at the small conference table in the corner of her office. Jake unpacked the containers, sliding a box of pad thai toward her without asking. He had noticed 2 weeks ago during a brief interaction in the break room that she always chose the peanut sauce over the curry. He didn't mention it. He just handed her a fork. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. Thank you. She took a bite, then set the fork down, staring at the grain of the wood table. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of her impending board meeting. Then the vulnerability cracked through. If he decrypts those files before tomorrow morning, my career here is over. It's not just the restructuring. My personal notes are in there. My doubts about the CEO. My own performance anxieties. If he leaks that to the board, they won't just deny my promotion. They'll ask for my resignation. Jake stopped eating. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He didn't say it'll be fine or don't worry. Those were meaningless platitudes. Instead, he analyzed the variables and offered a concrete fact. He won't decrypt them. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed stress. How can you be sure? Because I'm better than the person he hired to build his script. It wasn't arrogance. It was an objective measurement of skill. His code is sloppy. It relies on a generic library. My encryption is bespoke. I built it specifically for this server architecture. He would need a quantum processor and 10 years to break the hash. He has neither. Emily held his gaze. The panic that had been hovering at the edges of her vision began to recede, replaced by a profound, sudden stillness. The transfer of stability was palpable. Jake watched the tremor in her hands stop. She picked up her fork again. Okay. Just one word, but it carried the weight of a surrendered burden. Jake returned his attention to the food, but his mind was working through layers of code and consequence. Something about the attack pattern was bothering him, a detail he couldn't quite isolate. He set his fork down and pulled the laptop closer, typing a new query into the system logs. Emily watched him work. What is it? Robert's attack wasn't just sloppy. It was incomplete. Jake scrolled through lines of metadata. He's not good enough to build this kind of exploit on his own. Someone helped him. Who? Jake pulled up the access logs for the past 30 days, filtering by executive credentials. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. His chest tightened as the implications crystallized. He turned the screen toward her. William Bradford. Emily's face went white. No, William's been my mentor for 10 years. He recommended me for this position. Jake pointed to the timeline. 3 weeks ago, Bradford accessed the board's confidential succession planning documents. 2 weeks ago, he had a private meeting with Robert that wasn't on the official calendar. 1 week ago, Robert's credentials were used to create a backdoor into your system. And yesterday, Bradford transferred $4.3 million from the Corporate Infrastructure Fund into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid. When she spoke, her voice was thin and controlled. You're telling me William's been embezzling, and he's using Robert to destroy me so I can't expose him. That's the only explanation that fits the data. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Jake saw something other than composure or exhaustion. He saw fury. Then we burn them both. Jake shook his head. Not yet. If we move now, they'll know we're onto them. Bradford has enough influence on the board to spin this as a witch hunt. We need airtight evidence, and we need to present it in a way that leaves no room for interpretation. Emily walked back to the desk and sat down in the chair across from him. Her hands were flat on the surface, fingers splayed. What do you need from me? Time, and access to Bradford's executive drive. She didn't hesitate. You have it. Jake worked through the next 2 hours with a singular focus, building a digital dossier that would withstand forensic scrutiny. He traced the embezzlement through 3 layers of shell companies, documented the backdoor creation with timestamp precision, and cross-referenced Robert's access logs with Bradford's meeting schedules. Every piece of evidence was encrypted, hashed, and stored on an offline drive that he sent in his jacket pocket. By midnight, the fatigue was a physical weight in the room. Jake was back at the terminal, his eyes burning as he manually rebuilt the registry keys. Emily was asleep on the leather sofa. She had curled onto her side, her suit jacket draped over her shoulders like a blanket. Jake paused his typing for exactly 5 seconds to look at her. In the dim light of the monitors, stripped of her corporate armor, she looked remarkably fragile, yet completely resilient. He felt a sudden sharp ache in his chest, a pulling sensation, a quiet gravity that urged him to walk over and adjust the jacket to cover her arms. He kept his hands on the keyboard. Restraint wasn't a punishment. It was a discipline. The best way to protect her wasn't to hover over her while she slept. It was to ensure that when she woke up, her enemies had no weapons left to use against her. At 2 in the morning, the final progress bar hit 100%. The system locked the new encryption keys, sealing the drive in an impenetrable digital vault. The data leak was not only contained, but the stolen packets on Robert's server were rendered permanently inert. Jake ran a secondary script to wipe the logs on his end, leaving him with corrupted, useless files. He closed the terminal. The soft click of the mouse seemed loud in the quiet room. Before he woke her, he built the paper trail. First, the firewall logs went to an offline drive. Then each file got a SHA 256 hash timestamp to the second. The intrusion path, the credential misuse, and the corrupted packet captures came next, printed, aligned, stapled, and signed on the top page. Down the hall, the night security supervisor witnessed the timestamps before the whole bundle was sealed in a plain envelope. No speeches, just evidence that would survive a boardroom. A single-line notice went to the CEO's assistant. Security incident contained, formal briefing at 8:30, evidence on hand. Emily stirred. She sat up slowly, rubbing her face, her hair falling out of its perfect arrangement. She looked at him, blinking against the light. "Is it done?" "It's done." Jake stood, stretching his back, the joints popping in the silence. "Your drive is secure. The network is stabilized. The automated lockdown will lift at 6. She looked at the clock, then back at him. "You stayed awake the entire time." "That was the job." "No." Her voice gained strength, the executive authority returning, but tempered with something much softer. "The job was to log the error and report it to IT tomorrow. You bypassed protocol to fix it yourself. You stayed." Jake didn't have a logical defense for that, so he said nothing. He just gathered his jacket from the back of the chair. "Get some sleep, Emily. You have a board meeting in 6 hours." She stood, crossing the space between them in 3 steps. Her hand caught his wrist, not pulling, not demanding, just holding him in place. Her voice came quiet but unambiguous. "Why did you really stay, Jake?" He looked down at her hand on his wrist, then up at her face. The exhaustion was still there, but so was something else, something raw and uncertain and achingly human. He could have deflected. He could have given her the same answer he'd given before. But the night had stripped away too many layers for him to hide behind professionalism now. His voice came low, rougher than he intended. "Because letting bad people win isn't something I can accept, not anymore." Emily's grip tightened. "That's not the whole truth, is it?" Jake felt the words forming before he could stop them. "No." "Then say it again. The real reason." He held her gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, he let himself feel the pull of connection, the dangerous gravity of wanting to protect someone not out of duty but out of something deeper. Because you deserve someone who won't walk away when things get hard. The silence between them stretched taut as a wire. Emily's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the manipulation. She found none. Her hand slipped from his wrist, but the space between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like potential. She stepped back, her voice steady. "Thank you, Jake, for all of this." He nodded once and turned toward the door, but before he left, he looked back at her one more time. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal. Robert's going to come at you hard, but you'll be ready and I'll be there." Emily's expression softened into something that looked almost like hope. "I believe you." Jake walked out of her office and back to the elevator. The ride down to the 42nd floor felt longer than it should have. When he finally stepped out into the server room, The cold air hit him like a reset button. He gathered his things, the laptop, the external drives, the printed evidence, and locked them in the secure cabinet. Then he sat down in his chair and pulled out his phone. One missed call from Marcus. One text message from a number he didn't recognize. He opened the text. It was a photo of Lily, asleep in Marcus's guest room, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's last gift to her. The message underneath read, "She's fine. Asked if you won the fight. I told her yes. See you tomorrow." Jake stared at the photo for a long time. His daughter's face, peaceful in sleep, the gap-toothed smile hidden but still present in the curve of her lips. He thought about the promise he'd made to Sarah in the hospital 3 years ago when the cancer had finally won. He'd promised to raise Lily with integrity, to teach her that character mattered more than convenience, that doing the right thing was its own reward even when it cost you everything. Tonight he'd kept that promise, but the cost was mounting. The contract job paid well, but it wasn't enough to cover Lily's surgery. The cardiologist had been blunt. She had 6 months, maybe less, before the congenital defect in her heart would require surgical intervention. The cost was $180,000. Insurance covered a third. Jake had been saving every penny from this contract, but he was still $60,000 short. And now, by exposing Robert and Bradford, he'd likely painted a target on his own back. Corporate espionage cases had a way of turning messy. Whistleblowers rarely came out unscathed, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that when Lily asked him tomorrow if he'd fought the bad guys, the answer would be yes. Jake locked the server room and headed for the parking garage. The building was slant, the kind of stunts that only exists in the dead hours between night and morning. His footsteps echoed in the stairwell. When he reached the ground floor, he paused at the security desk to sign out. The guard, an older man named Frank who always had a kind word, looked up from his newspaper. "Burning the midnight oil, Mr. Mitchell?" "Something like that." Frank grinned. "That little girl of yours is lucky to have a father who works so hard." Jake felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. "I'm the lucky one, Frank. She's the reason I keep going." He walked out into the Chicago night. The air was cold, sharp, biting at his face. The city hummed with its usual indifferent energy. Cars on distant highways, the rumble of the L train, the glow of streetlights reflecting off glass towers. Jake climbed into his 10-year-old sedan, the one with the cracked windshield and the seat that didn't quite recline anymore, and started the engine. The drive to Marcus's apartment took 20 minutes. By the time he arrived, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, the first hint of dawn creeping over Lake Michigan. Marcus opened the door before Jake could knock. He looked tired but alert, his dark eyes sharp with concern. "You look like hell. Long night." Marcus stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small but warm, cluttered with books and old vinyl records. Lily was still asleep on the couch, the rabbit tucked under her chin. Jake walked over and knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was warm, her breathing steady. The medical bracelet on her wrist caught the light, a thin band of silicone printed with her name, her condition, and an emergency contact number. Marcus came to stand beside him, his voice low. "She asked about you all night. Wanted to know if the bad guys were really bad or just confused." Jake almost smiled. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that some people are bad on purpose and some people just make bad choices. But her daddy always knows the difference." Jake looked up at his friend. "Thanks for doing this." Marcus shrugged. "You'd do the same for me. Besides, she's a good kid. Reminds me why the world's worth fighting for." Jake stood and carefully lifted Lily into his arms. She stirred but didn't wake, her head resting against his shoulder. He carried her out to the car and buckled her into the back seat, tucking the rabbit beside her. Marcus watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. "Whatever you're into, Jake, be careful. Corporate types play dirty." "I know." Jake closed the car door and turned to face his friend. "But sometimes you don't get to choose the fight. Sometimes the fight chooses you." Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then make sure you win. Jake drove home as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, Lily was starting to wake. She blinked up at him, her brown eyes still heavy with sleep. Her voice came small and drowsy. "Daddy, did you win?" Jake unbuckled her and lifted her out of the car, holding her close. "Yeah, baby, I won." "Good." She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "Mommy would be proud." The words hit him harder than any code breach or corporate betrayal ever could. He carried his daughter up the stairs to their second-floor apartment, unlocked the door and set her down in her room. She climbed into bed without protest, the rabbit taking its place beside her pillow. Jake sat on the edge of her bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Get some sleep, Lily. I'll make pancakes when you wake up." She smiled, the gap in her front teeth visible even in the dim light. "The ones Mommy taught you?" "The exact ones." Lily's eyes drifted closed, but her hand reached out and found his. She held it tight. "Daddy, are you sad?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about lying, about giving her the easy answer. But Sarah had taught him that children deserved honesty, even when it was hard. "A little, but I'm grateful too." "For what?" "For you, and for Mommy, and for the chance to do the right thing, even when it's hard." Lily squeezed his hand. "Mommy said doing the right thing is what makes you a hero." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Your mommy was the smartest person I ever knew." "I know." Lily's voice was fading into sleep. "That's why she picked you." Jake sat there until her breathing evened out, until her hand relaxed in his. Then he stood, kissed her forehead, and walked out into the living room. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for a table, a living room that doubled as his office. But it was home. The walls were covered with Lily's drawings, taped up in haphazard rows, pictures of stars and flowers and stick figure families. In the corner, on a shelf beside the television, sat a framed photograph of Sarah, her smile wide, her eyes bright, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Jake picked up the frame and ran his thumb over the glass. "I hope I did right tonight, Sarah. I hope you'd be proud." The apartment offered no answer, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Jake set the frame back on the shelf and collapsed onto the couch. He had 3 hours before he needed to be back at the office for the board meeting. 3 hours to rest, to prepare, to steel himself for whatever came next. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed the night's events, the breach, the encryption, the evidence he'd built against Robert and Bradford, and underneath it all, the memory of Emily's hand on his wrist, her voice asking him to tell the truth. He hadn't lied, but he hadn't told her everything either. He hadn't told her that for the first time since Sarah's death, he'd felt something other than numbness. He hadn't told her that the thought of walking away from this fight, from her, felt impossible. Jake closed his eyes and let the exhaustion take him. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tomorrow would bring conflict. But tonight he'd done what he set out to do. He'd protected someone who deserved protection, and that, for now, was enough. The alarm pulled Jake from shallow sleep at 5:30 Friday morning. His body protested. 3 hours of rest after an all-night siege wasn't enough to reset the system, but his mind was already running diagnostics on the day ahead. He stood in the shower and let scalding water beat against his shoulders while he mentally rehearsed the board presentation. Robert would come armed with corrupted data and righteous indignation. Bradford would play the concerned mentor, positioning himself as the voice of reason while quietly maneuvering to bury the evidence. The CEO, James Patterson, would demand clarity, and Emily would need to stand in that room knowing her career hung on the credibility of a contract security analyst she'd only met face-to-face 12 hours ago. Jake dried off and dressed in the same gray t-shirt and jeans from yesterday. He didn't own a suit. He'd never needed one. His work happened in server rooms and behind screens, places where competence mattered more than presentation. But today he'd be walking into the executive boardroom and the optics would matter. He made a mental note to stop by his locker and grab the black button-down Marcus had given him last Christmas, still in its packaging, still waiting for an occasion that justified its existence. In the kitchen, he started a pot of coffee and pulled out the ingredients for pancakes. Sarah's recipe was simple: flour, eggs, milk, a pinch of salt, a tablespoon of vanilla extract. The vanilla was the secret, she'd always said. It made ordinary ingredients taste like something worth remembering. Jake mixed the batter by hand, watching the lumps dissolve into smooth consistency. The rhythm was meditative: crack, whisk, pour, flip. By the time Lily padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes, he had a stack of golden pancakes waiting on a plate. She climbed into her chair at the small table and reached for the syrup. Her movements were slow, careful, the way they always were in the mornings. The heart condition didn't show itself in dramatic collapses or visible symptoms. It was subtler than that: a persistent fatigue, a shortness of breath after climbing stairs, a need for rest that other 7-year-olds didn't experience. The doctors had explained it in clinical terms: congenital septal defect, moderate regurgitation, surgical intervention required within 6 months. But what it meant in practical terms was that Lily's childhood was measured in cautious increments, in doctor's appointments and medical bracelets, and the ever-present knowledge that time was not on their side. She poured syrup in careful circles, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Daddy, did you sleep?" "A little. You smell like coffee and worry." Jake almost smiled. "That's a very specific smell, baby. Mommy used to smell like that before big presentations." Lily took a bite of pancake, chewed thoughtfully, then looked up at him with those impossibly perceptive brown eyes. "Are you giving a big presentation today?" "Something like that." "Are you nervous?" Jake sat down across from her with his own plate. The question deserved an honest answer. "A little. But nervous isn't bad. It means you care about getting it right." Lily nodded, processing this with the seriousness she brought to most conversations. "Mommy used to say that caring is brave." The words landed with quiet weight. Jake reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your mommy was right about a lot of things." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other's rhythms. When Lily finished, she carried her plate to the sink and rinsed it carefully, a habit Sarah had instilled early, a small gesture of responsibility and care. Then she disappeared into her room and returned with a piece of paper folded in half. She handed it to Jake. "I made you something." He unfolded it. The drawing was done in colored pencil, a stick figure in gray standing next to a taller stick figure in white. Above them, stars filled the sky in careful yellow dots. At the bottom, in Lily's careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Daddy and the sad lady, she has no smile." Jake stared at the drawing, his throat tightening. "When did you draw this?" "Last night. At Uncle Marcus's house. I was thinking about you fighting bad guys, and I saw her in my head. She's pretty, but she forgot how to be happy." Lily tilted her head, studying his reaction. "Did you make her smile, Daddy?" Jake folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I'm trying, baby. Sometimes helping people smile takes time." Lily climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. Her voice came small and certain. "You're good at helping. That's why Mommy picked you." Jake held his daughter and wondered how someone so small could carry so much wisdom. He kissed the top of her head and stood, setting her gently on her feet. "Come on, let's get you ready for school." By 7:15, Lily was dressed and fed and standing at the door with her backpack. Jake drove her to the elementary school 3 blocks away, watching in the rearview mirror as she hummed along to the radio. When they pulled up to the drop-off zone, she unbuckled herself and leaned forward to kiss his cheek. Her voice came bright and fierce. "Win your fight today, Daddy." "I will." "Promise?" Jake turned to look at her fully. "I promise." Lily grinned, that gap-toothed smile that could break and rebuild his heart in the same moment, and climbed out of the car. He watched her walk through the school doors, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders before pulling back into traffic. The city was waking up around him, commuters flooding the streets, coffee shops opening their doors, the relentless forward motion of another day. Jake drove back to the high-rise and parked in the underground garage. The building felt different in daylight, less ominous, more mundane. But the tension was still there, coiled beneath the surface, waiting. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor and retrieved the black button-down from his locker. It fit well enough, though the fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. He rolled the sleeves to his elbows, a compromise between professionalism and comfort, and transferred the evidence envelope from his jacket to a leather messenger bag Marcus had loaned him months ago. Then he checked his watch, 8:15. The board meeting started at 9. He had 45 minutes to prepare. Jake rode the elevator to the executive floor. The suite was already buzzing with activity. Assistants preparing coffee service, executives huddled in quiet conversations, the low hum of power consolidating before the main event. He walked past Emily's office and saw her through the glass wall, standing at her desk reviewing notes. She looked up as he passed, and their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of alliance, and he returned the gesture before continuing down the hall. The boardroom was at the end of the corridor, a massive space dominated by a long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, framing the skyline in sharp morning light. Jake slipped inside and took a seat in the back row, the section reserved for support staff and contractors. He set the messenger bag on the floor beside him and waited. At 8:55, the board members began to arrive. Jake recognized most of them from the company directory. 7 men and 2 women, all in their 50s and 60s, all carrying the particular brand of confidence that came from decades of navigating corporate hierarchies. William Bradford entered last, his silver hair impeccably styled, his suit tailored to perfection. He greeted each board member with a handshake and a smile, playing the role of elder statesman with practiced ease. His eyes swept the room and landed on Jake for a moment, assessing, dismissing, moving on. Emily entered at exactly 9. She wore a navy suit with a cream blouse, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, her expression controlled and unreadable. She carried a leather portfolio and a tablet, the tools of her trade. She took her place at the head of the table, standing rather than sitting, and waited for the room to settle. CEO James Patterson called the meeting to order. He was a tall man with a lined face and shrewd eyes, the kind of leader who said little but missed nothing. His voice carried authority without volume. "Good morning. We have a full agenda today, so let's begin. Emily, you're up first. Walk us through the quarterly projections and your proposed restructuring plan." Emily opened her portfolio and began. Her presentation was flawless, data-driven, clear, methodical. She outlined the financial projections with precision, highlighting areas of growth and identifying inefficiencies that needed correction. When she reached the restructuring proposal, she didn't soften the blow. Robert's operations department was bleeding capital through redundant processes and outdated infrastructure. Her recommendation, a 30% reduction in headcount, a shift to automated systems, and a reallocation of resources to higher-value initiatives. Jake watched Robert's face as Emily spoke. The man sat 3 seats down from James, his jaw tight, his hands flat on the table. He was holding himself in check, waiting for his moment to strike. Emily finished and closed her portfolio. "Questions?" Robert's hand went up immediately. James nodded toward him. "Robert." Robert leaned forward, his tone measured but laced with accusation. Emily, your analysis is thorough, but I think the board should be aware of some concerns about the integrity of the data you're presenting. Last night, I received an anonymous data dump, files that appear to have been extracted from your personal DRE. They suggest a level of bias in your assessments that calls your objectivity into question. The room went still. Emily's expression didn't change, but Jake saw the tension in her shoulders. Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table toward James. I recommend IT review this immediately. If the files are authentic, we have a serious problem. James picked up this drive, his face impassive. He looked at Emily. Do you have a response? Emily's voice came steady, no trace of panic. I welcome the review, however, I believe Jake Mitchell, our independent security contractor, should handle the drive to ensure chain of custody and proper forensic analysis. James's eyes shifted to Jake in the back row. Mr. Mitchell, please come forward. Jake stood and walked to the front of the room. Every eye in the boardroom tracked his movement. The contractor in the black button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, carrying a messenger bag instead of a briefcase. He took the flash drive from James and pulled a laptop from his bag, connecting the drive and mirroring the screen to the main projector. Robert leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He thought he'd won. Jake opened the drive. A list of files appeared, documents labeled with provocative names designed to suggest scandal and misconduct. He clicked the first file. The screen filled with a chaotic, meaningless string of alphanumeric characters. Corrupted data. He clicked the next, more corrupted data. He ran a diagnostic script projecting the results on the wall for everyone to see. His voice was calm, clinical, devoid of emotion. This drive contains nothing but shattered hash fragments. The data is unreadable, corrupted at the source. He paused, letting the information settle, then delivered the next blow with surgical precision. Furthermore, the metadata on these fragments indicates they were illicitly scraped from an internal node using an unauthorized packet sniffer, a node registered to Robert Anderson. The silence in the room shifted from tense to lethal. Robert's smile vanished, replaced by a pale, stammering panic. That's impossible! The script was... Someone tampered with it! Emily stood, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Yes, Robert, someone did! I authorized Jake to perform a localized security audit last night after detecting your intrusion. You didn't receive a whistleblower dump. You executed a corporate espionage hack against a fellow executive, and you failed. She reached into her own portfolio and pulled out a stack of paper, the evidence Jake had compiled during the night. She tossed it onto the table in front of James. Hard copies of my actual restructuring proposal, the one based on metrics, not bias, and documentation of Mr. Anderson's attack, time-stamped and verified. James picked up the stack and began to read. The board members leaned in, murmuring among themselves. Robert looked around the room, finding no allies, only cold stares. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly. This is a setup. She's trying to... James's voice cut him off, sharp and final. My office, Robert, now! Robert gathered his things in shaking hands and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. James turned his attention back to Emily. Continue with your presentation. Emily resumed as if nothing had happened, walking the board through the financial models and implementation timelines. But Jake could see the shift in the room. The board members were listening with new respect, asking sharper questions, engaging with the material instead of looking for reasons to dismiss it. By the time Emily finished, the restructuring plan had been tentatively approved, pending a deeper review of Robert's department. James adjourned the meeting at 10:30. The board members filed out in clusters, their conversations hushed and urgent. Bradford lingered near the door, his expression carefully neutral. He caught Jake's eye as he left, and there was something in that look. Calculation, assessment, warning. Jake packed his laptop and waited until the room was empty except for Emily. She stood by the windows, her back to him, her shoulders finally allowing themselves to sag under the weight of what had just happened. Jake walked over and stood beside her, close enough that their reflections overlapped in the glass. His voice came low. "You did well. We did well." She turned to face him, and for the first time that morning her mask slipped entirely. What remained was exhaustion and something that looked like gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you, Jake. Robert would have destroyed me." "He'll be fired by noon." "And Bradford?" Jake hesitated. The evidence against Bradford was solid, but it hadn't been presented yet. Exposing Robert was one thing, a clear-cut case of corporate espionage. But accusing a sitting CFO of embezzlement required a different level of proof, a different strategy. "Bradford's still a problem, but we have time now. Robert was the immediate threat." Emily nodded, accepting the logic. She reached out and touched his arm, a brief contact that carried more meaning than words. "Thank you." Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Marcus. "Call me, now." Jake excused himself and stepped into the hallway, dialing as he walked. Marcus picked up on the first ring, his voice tight with concern. "Jake, you need to get to the school. Lily collapsed during recess. They're calling an ambulance." The world tilted. Jake's vision narrowed to a single point, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What happened?" "I don't know. The school nurse called me when they couldn't reach you. Said something about her heart monitor showing irregular rhythm. Jake, they're taking her to Northwestern Memorial." Jake was already moving, breaking into a run toward the elevator. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and punched the elevator button repeatedly, a useless gesture that did nothing to speed its arrival. When the doors finally opened, Emily was standing inside, her expression sharp with alarm. "What's wrong?" "My daughter. She collapsed. I have to go." Emily didn't hesitate. "I'm driving." Jake didn't argue. He stepped into the elevator and Emily hit the button for the parking garage. The descent felt interminable, 42 floors collapsing in agonizing slow motion. When they reached the garage, Emily led him to a silver BMW parked in a reserved spot. She unlocked it remotely and slid into the driver's seat. Jake climbed in beside her, his hands shaking. Emily pulled out of the garage and into traffic with the precision of someone who'd learned to navigate crisis without falling apart. She wove through the Friday morning congestion, cutting across lanes, running yellow lights, her focus absolute. Jake sat in the passenger seat and tried to breathe. His mind was spinning worst-case scenarios. Cardiac arrest, emergency surgery, the doctor's voice telling him there was nothing more they could do. Emily's voice cut through the spiral, calm and grounding. "Tell me about her." Jake blinked, pulling himself back to the present. "What?" "Your daughter. Tell me about her." It was a lifeline disguised as a request. Jake latched onto it. "Lily, she's 7, smart as hell. She draws these pictures, observations about people, about the world. She sees things most adults miss." "Like what?" "Like you." Jake pulled the folded drawing from his jacket pocket and handed it to Emily. She glanced at it while navigating a turn, her eyes widening slightly when she saw the caption. "The sad lady, she has no smile." Emily's voice came softer. "She drew this?" "Last night, while I was with you." Jake took the drawing back and refolded it carefully. "She told me this morning that I should help you remember how to be happy." Emily was quiet for a moment, processing, then, "She's right. I did forget." They reached Northwestern Memorial at 11. Emily pulled up to the emergency entrance and Jake was out of the car before it fully stopped. He sprinted through the automatic doors and straight to the reception desk, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "Lily Mitchell, 7 years old. She was brought in by ambulance." The receptionist typed rapidly, her face sympathetic. "She's in pediatric cardiology, 3rd floor, East Wing, room 314. Jake didn't wait for more information. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his lungs burning by the time he reached the third floor. He burst through the door to the east wing and ran down the corridor until he found room 314. The door was open. Inside, Lily lay in a hospital bed, small and pale against white sheets. A nurse was adjusting an IV line while a doctor reviewed a chart. Jake crossed the room in 2 strides and took Lily's hand. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Daddy?" "I'm here, baby, I'm right here." The doctor looked up from the chart, his expression serious but not panicked. He was in his 50s with kind eyes and the calm demeanor of someone who'd delivered difficult news more times than he could count. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Thompson. Lily experienced an arrhythmia episode during physical activity. We've stabilized her, but we need to talk about next steps." Jake didn't let go of Lily's hand. "What does that mean?" Dr. Thompson set the chart down and pulled up a stool, sitting so he was at eye level with Jake. "The septal defect we've been monitoring has progressed faster than we anticipated. Her heart is working too hard to compensate, and the strain is causing irregular rhythms. We can manage it with medication in the short term, but surgery can't wait 6 months anymore. We're looking at 10 days, 2 weeks maximum." The words landed like physical blows. Jake felt the room tilt, felt the weight of impossibility pressing down on his chest. 10 days. The surgery cost $180,000. Insurance covered 60. He had 70 saved. He was still 50,000 short, and there was no way to earn that kind of money in 10 days. Lily squeezed his hand, her voice small but steady. "Daddy, don't be scared. Mommy's watching." Jake looked down at his daughter, at the bravery in her eyes, the absolute trust that he would fix this, because that's what fathers did, and felt something break and harden simultaneously inside him. He kissed her forehead and stood, turning to Dr. Thompson. "Schedule the surgery. I'll figure out the money." Dr. Thompson nodded, no judgment in his expression. "We'll move forward. The surgical team will be in touch with scheduling details." Jake walked out into the hallway and leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly unsteady. He closed his eyes and tried to think, tried to calculate, tried to find a solution that didn't exist. $50,000 in 10 days. It was impossible unless... "Jake!" He opened his eyes. Emily was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She must have parked and followed him up. She'd heard everything. Her voice came quiet but firm. "How much do you need?" Jake shook his head. "I'm not taking your money." "That wasn't the question. How much?" "Emily, I can't." "How much, Jake?" Her voice sharpened, cutting through his refusal. "Your daughter's life is on the line. This isn't about pride." Jake felt anger flare, not at her but at the situation, at the universe, at the unfairness of a world where a child's survival depended on whether her father could produce an arbitrary sum of money fast enough. 50,000. But I'm not taking charity." Emily stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Then don't call it charity. Call it an investment. You saved my career last night. You risked your contract, your reputation, everything. Let me return the favor." "It's not the same." "Why? Because you're supposed to be the hero who doesn't need help?" Emily's voice softened, but the intensity didn't fade. "Jake, I've spent 10 years building walls, telling myself that accepting help makes me weak. And it's made me exactly what your daughter drew, someone who forgot how to be happy. Don't make the same mistake. Let someone help you." Jake looked at her, at the earnestness in her face, the desperation to do something that mattered, and felt the argument collapse under the weight of reality. Lily needed surgery. The money didn't exist. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. But taking Emily's money felt like crossing a line, like becoming someone who compromised his principles when the stakes got high enough. His voice came rough. "If I take this, what does that make me?" Emily's answer was immediate, unequivocal. A father who loves his daughter more than his ego. The simplicity of it cut through every defense. Jake closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. When he opened them again, Emily was still there, still waiting. He nodded once, a small, reluctant gesture of surrender. Emily pulled out her phone and made a call. Her voice shifted into executive mode, crisp and efficient. "Daniel, it's Emily Carson. I need to liquidate $50,000 from my personal portfolio. Yes, immediately. Wire transfer to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Pediatric Cardiology Department, patient account for Lily Mitchell. Flag it as a direct payment towards surgical costs." She paused, listening. "I don't care about the tax implications. Just do it, thank you." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. "It's done." Jake stared at her, his throat tight. "I'll pay you back. I know you will, but right now, go be with your daughter. That's what matters." Jake wanted to say something more, something that captured the magnitude of what she'd just done, but the words wouldn't form. So he just nodded and turned back toward Lily's room. Emily caught his wrist, stopping him for a moment. Her voice came barely above a whisper. "Jake, when this is over, when Lily is safe, we need to talk about Bradford, about what comes next." "I know." She let go and Jake walked back into the hospital room. Lily was awake now, more alert, the color returning to her cheeks as the medication took effect. She smiled when she saw him, that gap-toothed grin that could break worlds. "Did you win your fight, Daddy?" Jake sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. "Working on it, baby, but I'm getting help from a friend." "The sad lady?" "She's not so sad anymore." Lily's smile widened. "Good. Everybody needs friends." Jake stayed with Lily through the afternoon as doctors came and went, running tests and finalizing the surgical plan. Emily remained in the waiting room, working on her laptop, making calls, refusing to leave until she knew Lily was stable. Marcus showed up around 3 with a bag of Lily's favorite things: books, stuffed animals, the rabbit from Sarah. He sat with them for an hour, telling stories that made Lily laugh, filling the sterile room with warmth. By 5, the immediate crisis had passed. Lily was scheduled for surgery the following Friday, exactly 1 week away. The doctors were optimistic about the outcome, but cautious about the risks. Dr. Thompson laid it out in clear terms. The surgery had a 92% success rate in patients Lily's age, but complications could include infection, prolonged recovery, or in rare cases, cardiac failure. Jake absorbed the statistics without emotion, filing them away in the part of his brain that dealt with probabilities and risk management. The only number that mattered was 92. Those were good odds. He'd take them. When the doctors finally left, Jake walked out to the waiting room and found Emily exactly where he'd left her. She looked up from her laptop, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. "How is she?" "Stable. Surgery's scheduled for next Friday." Jake sat down beside her, the weight of the day finally catching up to him. "Thank you for everything." Emily closed her laptop and set it aside. "You don't need to thank me. This is what people do when they care about each other." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither of them was quite ready to unpack. Jake turned to look at her fully, studying her face, the careful control, the vulnerability underneath. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Emily's voice was steady, certain. "I know you're the kind of person who stays up all night to protect someone you just met. I know you turned down a bribe that could have saved your daughter because your integrity matters more than convenience. I know you're a good man, Jake Mitchell, and good men are rare enough that when you find one, you don't let go." Jake felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the armor he'd built around himself since Sarah's death. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become love if he let it. And that terrified him more than any corporate conspiracy or medical crisis. His voice came rough. "I don't know how to do this. Since Sarah, I haven't let anyone in." Emily reached out and placed her hand over his, a deliberate gesture of connection. "Then we'll figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty and time." Jake looked down at their hands, hers pale and manicured, his darker and scarred from years of server rack installations, and felt the quiet gravity of choice pulling at him. He could walk away, he could retreat back into the safety of solitude and single-minded focus on Lily. Or he could take the risk, accept the help, let someone else carry part of the weight. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. Okay. Emily's smile was small but genuine, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Okay. They sat in the waiting room until visiting hours ended, talking in low voices about nothing important. Favorite foods, childhood memories, the absurdity of corporate politics. It was the kind of conversation that built scaffolding between strangers, creating structure that could support something more substantial later. When the nurse finally came to tell them it was time to leave, Jake felt an unexpected reluctance to let the moment end. He walked Emily to her car in the hospital parking garage, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the concrete. She unlocked the BMW and turned to face him, her expression open in a way he suspected was rare for her. Jake, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Always. Last night when you stayed to fix my system, when you risked your contract and your time with Lily, you said it was because I deserved someone who wouldn't walk away. Did you mean that? Jake held her gaze, weighing the implications of the truth. He could deflect, retreat into professionalism, maintain the distance that would keep things simple. But Lily's words echoed in his mind. Caring is brave, and if he was asking Emily to be honest, he owed her the same. Yes, I meant it. Why? The question demanded more than platitudes. Jake took a breath and gave her what she was asking for, the raw, unfiltered truth. Because when I looked at you last night, I saw someone fighting alone, and I know what that's like. After Sarah died, I spent 2 years drowning in grief and responsibility, convinced that asking for help was the same as admitting failure. It took Lily getting sick for me to realize that strength isn't about carrying everything yourself. It's about knowing when to let someone else in. He paused, then added quietly, You reminded me of who I used to be, and I didn't want you to stay that way. Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to have someone actually see me. Not the title, not the position, just me. I see you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Emily stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were inches apart. Her voice came barely above a whisper. Say it again. Jake understood what she was asking for. Not repetition, but commitment. Confirmation that this wasn't performance or strategy, but something real. He raised his hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I see you, Emily, and I'm not going anywhere. She exhaled, a sound that was part relief and part release, and leaned into him. Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding her while the parking garage hummed with the distant sound of traffic and ventilation systems. They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd been alone too long finally allowing themselves the dangerous luxury of connection. When they finally pulled apart, Emily's composure had returned, but something fundamental had shifted. She opened her car door and paused. Come to my place tomorrow. Bring Lily. I want to meet her properly, not as the CEO, just as Emily. Jake felt the invitation settle over him like a promise. We'll be there. Emily drove away and Jake stood in the parking garage watching her taillights disappear. Then he pulled out his phone and called Marcus. How's Lily? Stable. Surgery's next Friday. Jake walked toward his own car, the 10-year-old sedan that looked even more pathetic next to the luxury vehicles surrounding it. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Emily Carson paid for the surgery. There was a pause on the other end. The CEO? Yeah. Jake, are you sure that's a good idea, taking money from someone you barely know? Jake unlocked his car and climbed inside. I don't know if it's a good idea, but it's the only idea, and she didn't do it to gain leverage. She did it because... He stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. Marcus's voice came knowing. Because she cares about you. Maybe. Jake, listen to me. You've been closed off since Sarah died, and I get it. Losing her broke something in you, but you can't stay broken forever. If this woman is reaching out, if she's trying to help, maybe you should let her. Jake started the engine and sat in the darkness of his car, considering. What if I let her in and it goes wrong? What if Lily gets attached and then you deal with it? But you can't protect Lily from every possible hurt by keeping her isolated. Kids are resilient, and she needs to see that it's okay to trust people, to let them matter. Marcus's voice softened. Sarah would want you to be happy, man. You know that. Jake closed his eyes. Sarah's voice came to him across 3 years of silence, a memory so vivid it felt like presence. The conversation in the hospital room 2 days before she died when the cancer had won, and they both knew it. Her hand in his, her voice weak but determined. Don't waste your life mourning mine. Promise me you'll find someone who makes you laugh again. Promise me you'll let Lily see what love looks like. He'd made the promise, but he hadn't kept it. Until now. Okay, Jake said into the phone. I'll try. Good. Now go home and get some sleep. You look like hell. Jake ended the call and drove back to his apartment. The building was quiet, most residents already settled in for the evening. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and unlocked his door. The apartment felt emptier than usual without Lily. Her energy filled spaces in ways he only noticed when she was gone. He walked to her room and stood in the doorway looking at the drawings taped to her walls. Stars and flowers and stick figure families. In the corner, a new drawing he hadn't seen before, 3 figures holding hands. Daddy, Lily, and a tall figure in white labeled E. Jake pulled out his phone and took a picture of the drawing. Then he sent it to Emily with a single line of text. She already knows. The response came back almost immediately. Then we'd better not disappoint her. Jake set his phone on the kitchen counter and made himself dinner. Instant ramen because cooking for one felt pointless. He ate standing at the counter, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Emily was probably working late, reviewing files, preparing for the next battle. And somewhere in a hospital bed 3 miles away, Lily was sleeping. Her heart beating an irregular rhythm that would be fixed in 7 days if everything went according to plan. Jake finished his ramen and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed the day's events, the board meeting, Robert's defeat, Lily's collapse, Emily's offer, and underneath it all, the quiet terror of hope creeping back into his life after years of carefully managed numbness. Hope was dangerous. Hope set you up for devastation when things fell apart. But it was also the only thing that made life worth living. He rolled over and looked at the photograph of Sarah on his nightstand. Her smile was frozen in time, eternal and unchanging. He spoke to her in the darkness, a habit he'd developed in the months after her death. I think I'm starting to care about someone, Sarah, and it scares me, because the last time I cared this much I lost you, and I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss again. The apartment offered no answer, just silence and the distant sound of traffic. Jake closed his eyes and tried to quiet his mind. Tomorrow he'd bring Lily to meet Emily properly. Tomorrow they'd start building something that might be a friendship, or might be more. Tomorrow the world would keep turning, indifferent to his fears and hopes. But tonight he'd let himself feel the dangerous pull of connection. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn light that made Chicago look almost forgiving. Jake woke at 6:30 without an alarm, his body still calibrated to crisis mode despite the relative calm. Lily had been discharged from the hospital Friday evening with strict instructions for rest and monitoring. She'd slept in his bed, curled against his side, her breathing steady through the night. Now she was awake and sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, adding details to a new drawing. 3 figures standing in front of a house with a garden. Jake made coffee and watched her work, noting the careful precision she brought to each line. The figure labeled E was taller than the others now, her dress rendered in careful strokes of purple crayon. Purple like the flowers Emily had sent to the hospital room yesterday afternoon, a small arrangement of irises chosen deliberately for their name. The card had read simply, "For Lily, who sees clearly." "Daddy, what time are we going to E's house?" Jake checked his watch. "Noon. We have a few hours. You hungry?" "Pancakes?" "Always." He made breakfast while Lily talked about her drawing, explaining the symbolism with the seriousness of a gallery curator. The house represented safety. The garden represented growth. The 3 figures holding hands represented family. Not replacement, but expansion. Jake listened and felt the complexity of his daughter's emotional intelligence settle over him like a weight. She understood what he was still struggling to accept, that loving someone new didn't erase who came before. At 11, they dressed carefully. Jake chose clean jeans and a gray Henley, still casual but making an effort. Lily wore her favorite dress, pale yellow with white flowers, and insisted on bringing the drawing as a gift. Jake folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then they drove across the city to Emily's address, a high-rise condominium in the Gold Coast neighborhood where the wealthy insulated themselves from the grit of ordinary Chicago. The building's lobby was all marble and modern art, staffed by a doorman who checked their names against a list before allowing them to the elevator. Jake felt the familiar discomfort of entering spaces designed to remind you of your economic position. But Lily seemed unbothered, her hand secure in his, her curiosity focused on the abstract sculpture in the corner. "That looks like a pretzel," she observed. "I think it's supposed to be something profound." "It's still a pretzel." Jake smiled despite himself. They rode the elevator to the 23rd floor in silence. When the doors opened, Emily was standing in the hallway outside her unit, wearing jeans and a soft cream sweater. The first time Jake had seen her in anything other than business attire. The transformation was startling. She looked younger, less armored, almost uncertain. She knelt to Lily's eye level. "You must be Lily. I've heard so much about you." Lily studied Emily with the frank assessment only children could manage. "You're prettier in person. In Daddy's phone picture, you look tired." Emily's laugh came genuine and surprised. "I was very tired, but I'm feeling better now." "Because Daddy helped you?" "Because your daddy helped me," Emily confirmed. She stood and met Jake's eyes over Lily's head, something warm passing between them. "Come in. I made lunch." The condominium was elegant but not ostentatious. Open floor plan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white, abstract paintings that actually looked like art instead of tax write-offs. But what struck Jake most was the evidence of recent change. Fresh flowers on the dining table, children's books stacked on the coffee table, clearly purchased this morning, a stuffed unicorn sitting on the couch, its tag still attached. Lily noticed immediately. "Is that for me?" Emily nodded, her expression tentative. "I wasn't sure what you liked. The store clerk said unicorns were popular." Lily walked over and picked up the unicorn, examining it with careful attention. Then she looked up at Emily with those perceptive brown eyes. "Do you have kids?" "No, I never learned how." "That's okay. Daddy didn't know how to do my hair at first, but he got better." Lily hugged the unicorn to her chest. "Thank you for my unicorn, and thank you for helping Daddy fix my heart." Emily's composure cracked for a moment, her eyes glistening. She crouched down again and spoke directly to Lily, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "You're very welcome, and I want you to know something important. Your daddy is helping me too. He's teaching me how to be brave." Lily considered this. then nodded with satisfaction. Good. Everybody needs teachers. Lunch was simple. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, chosen because Emily had remembered Jake mentioning it was Lily's favorite. They ate at the dining table with its view of the lake, conversation flowing in unexpected directions. Lily asked Emily about her job, and Emily explained corporate restructuring in terms a 7-year-old could grasp, fixing broken systems, helping people work better together. Lily asked if Emily had ever fought bad guys, and Emily admitted she was fighting some right now. Is Daddy helping you win? He is, but it's complicated. The bad guy is someone I used to trust. Lily absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. That's the worst kind. Mommy used to say betrayal hurts more than anything because you have to be close enough to trust before someone can break it. Emily looked at Jake, questions in her eyes. He supplied the context quietly. Sarah was a psychologist before she got sick. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. After lunch, Emily showed Lily the view from the balcony, 23 floors above the city, Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. Lily pressed her face against the glass and talked about how clouds looked different from high places. Emily listened with genuine interest, asking questions, engaging with the child's logic instead of dismissing it. Jake watched from inside and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of who Emily was. This wasn't performance. This was someone genuinely trying to connect, despite having no framework for how to do it. When Lily went to explore the bookshelves, Emily joined Jake by the windows. They stood close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Looking out at the water, her voice came low. She's extraordinary. She's the reason I'm still functional. I can see that. Emily turned to face him, her expression serious. Jake, I need to talk to you about something, about work. The shift was immediate, the warmth replaced by professional focus. Jake recognized the tone. Something had happened. What is it? Robert was fired Friday afternoon, but Bradford called me this morning. He wants to meet Monday morning, just the two of us. He said it's about moving forward constructively after Robert's departure. Emily's jaw tightened. He's planning something, I can feel it. Jake's mind shifted into analytical mode. He knows you have Robert's evidence. He's trying to assess how much you know about his involvement. That's what I thought. But I can't go into that meeting without leverage. If he suspects I have proof of the embezzlement, he could move the money, destroy evidence, disappear before we can act. Then we need to move first. Jake pulled out his phone and opened a secure note app. I documented everything Thursday night. The shell companies, the transfer records, the timestamps. It's all encrypted and backed up in 3 locations. But presenting it requires strategy. If we go to the FBI now, Bradford gets arrested, but the company takes a massive reputation hit. Stock plummets, employees suffer. If we handle it internally, there's a chance to contain the damage. Emily shook her head. Internal means the board investigates and half of them have loyalty to Bradford. They'll bury it to protect the company image. Not if we give them no choice. Jake closed the app and met her eyes. We present the evidence publicly. Not to the FBI first, to the board with witnesses in a setting where Bradford can't manipulate the narrative. We make it so transparent that any attempt to cover it up becomes its own scandal. An emergency board meeting. Exactly. But it has to be your call. You're the one putting your career on the line. Emily looked past him to where Lily was examining a book about constellations, completely absorbed. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new weight. 2 weeks ago, I would have played this safe. Taken the evidence to James privately, let him handle it quietly, protected my position. But your daughter drew a picture of me with no smile, and she was right. I've spent so long protecting my career that I forgot why I wanted it in the first place. She turned back to Jake, determination replacing uncertainty. We do it your way. Public, transparent, no room for spin. Monday morning. That gives Bradford 1 day to prepare. and gives us one day to make sure our evidence is bulletproof. Emily pulled out her own phone. I'm calling an emergency board session for Monday, 9 a.m. Required attendance. If Bradford doesn't show, it looks like guilt. If he does, we have him. She made the call, her voice shifting into executive authority, clipped, efficient, unquestionable. When she finished, she set the phone down and exhaled slowly. It's done. Lily appeared at Jake's side, the unicorn tucked under her arm. Daddy, can we show E my drawing? Jake pulled the folded paper from his pocket and handed it to Emily. She unfolded it carefully, studying the three figures holding hands in front of the house with the garden. Her finger traced the label on the tall figure E, and her expression softened into something that looked like wonder. This is beautiful, Lily. Is this your house? Not yet, but Daddy says if you imagine something enough, sometimes it becomes real. Emily looked at Jake over the drawing, a question in her eyes. He didn't have an answer, didn't know if he was ready for the implications of his daughter's vision. But he didn't contradict it either. He just held Emily's gaze and let the possibility hang between them. They spent the afternoon in careful domesticity, watching a movie Lily chose, making popcorn, laughing at the ridiculous antics of animated characters. It was so ordinary it felt revolutionary. Jake couldn't remember the last time he'd allowed himself an afternoon without agenda, without crisis, without the weight of responsibility crushing every moment into efficiency. Emily seemed equally disoriented by the simplicity, as if relaxation was a skill she'd forgotten how to access. Around 4, Lily fell asleep on the couch, the unicorn clutched in her arms. Jake carefully lifted her and carried her to Emily's bedroom, laying her on the bed and pulling a blanket over her. Emily stood in the doorway watching, her expression unreadable. When Jake walked back into the living room, Emily handed him a glass of whiskey. Good whiskey, the kind that tasted like smoke and careful aging. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. Emily spoke first. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about seeing me, and I realized I've spent so long performing that I'm not sure I know who I am without the performance. Jake took a sip of whiskey, considering his response. You're someone who bought children's books and a unicorn for a kid you'd never met. You're someone who paid for a stranger's daughter's surgery without hesitation. You're someone who's choosing to fight corruption even though it would be easier to stay quiet. He paused, then added, You're someone who forgot how to smile but is learning again. Emily's laugh came soft and self-deprecating. You make me sound better than I am. I make you sound accurate. She set her glass down and shifted closer, closing some of the distance between them. Jake, I need to tell you something about why I'm so... She gestured vaguely, searching for words. Why I'm like this. Why trust is hard. Jake waited, giving her space to construct the story at her own pace. Emily's voice came measured, controlled, but underneath ran a current of old pain. I was 22, first year at business school. I met someone charming, ambitious, told me everything I wanted to hear. We were together for 3 years. I helped him network, introduced him to my contacts, supported his career while sacrificing my own opportunities. She paused, swirling the whiskey in her glass. Senior year, he got an offer at a major firm. I thought we'd move together, build a life. Instead, he took the job and ghosted, just disappeared. I found out later he'd been using me the entire time. Every connection I made for him, he leveraged for himself. Every vulnerability I showed, he documented to use against me if needed. Jake felt anger tighten in his chest, not at Emily, but at the casual cruelty people inflicted when ambition eclipsed humanity. That's why you built the walls. That's why I built a fortress. I decided no one would ever use me again. I'd be the one with power, with control. I'd never need anyone enough that their absence could destroy me. Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting decades of practiced self-protection. And it worked. I climbed every ladder, earned every promotion, became exactly who I wanted to be. But Lily was right. Somewhere in the process, I forgot how to smile. Jake set his glass down and reached across the space, taking her hand. Protecting yourself isn't wrong, but neither is letting someone in who's earned it. And you think you've earned it? Her tone was teasing, but the question underneath was serious. I think I'm trying to, and I think you're trying too. That's enough for now. Emily squeezed his hand, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. I've never had this. The domesticity, the normalcy. Part of me doesn't know if I'm capable of it. You made grilled cheese and bought a unicorn. You're already doing it. That's just mimicking what I think normal looks like. No. Jake's voice came firm, grounding. That's caring. And caring is the foundation of everything else. Emily leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. The gesture was so unguarded, so unlike the executive armor she usually wore, that Jake felt his own defenses crack further. He wrapped his arm around her and they sat in silence. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. When Lily woke an hour later, they ordered pizza and ate on the floor by the coffee table because Lily insisted it was more fun that way. Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet in her expensive jeans, eating pepperoni and listening to Lily explain her theories about stars being dead people watching over the ones they loved. Jake watched Emily's face as she engaged with his daughter's cosmology, seeing genuine interest instead of polite tolerance. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Lily hugged Emily with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. Thank you for inviting us. Can we come back? Emily crouched down, her voice steady but emotional. Anytime you want. My door is always open for you and your dad. Promise? I promise. In the car on the drive home, Lily was quiet for a long time, processing the day in her internal way. Then as they stopped at a red light, she spoke up from the back seat. Daddy, I like E. She's sad, but she's trying not to be. What makes you think she's sad? Her house is too clean. Mommy used to say people who keep everything perfect are afraid of mess. And mess is just life happening. Jake glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter's face, illuminated by passing streetlights. You're very observant, baby. I know, it's my superpower. Lily hugged the unicorn closer. Daddy, is E going to be part of our family? The question landed with more weight than its simple phrasing suggested. Jake could have deflected, given a non-answer that protected against future disappointment. But Lily deserved honesty, even when honesty meant admitting uncertainty. I don't know yet. Would you want her to be? Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. I think Mommy would like her, and I think E needs us. So yes, if she wants to. And if she does, that would be okay with you? Having someone new in our lives? Daddy, Mommy's always going to be my mommy. Nobody can replace her. But that doesn't mean we can't have more people to love. Lily's voice came matter-of-fact, as if this logic was self-evident. Love doesn't run out. It just gets bigger. Jake felt his throat tighten with the kind of emotion that had no easy outlet. His 7-year-old daughter had just articulated something it took most adults a lifetime to understand. He pulled into their apartment parking lot and cut the engine, turning to look at her fully. When did you get so wise? Lily grinned. I was born this way. You just weren't paying attention. Sunday passed in quiet preparation. Jake spent the morning reviewing the evidence against Bradford, making sure every document was airtight, every timestamp verifiable. He burned copies to multiple drives and encrypted the master file with a passphrase only he and Emily knew. Marcus came by in the afternoon and watched Lily while Jake met Emily at a coffee shop downtown to finalize their strategy. They sat in a corner booth, laptops open, going through the presentation slide by slide. Emily would lead. It had to come from her to carry weight with the board. Jake would provide the technical breakdown, explaining how the money moved and how he'd traced it. The key was to present it as discovered evidence, not an accusation. Let the data speak for itself, force the board to draw the only logical conclusion. Emily closed her laptop and looked at him across the table. Are you sure you want to do this? If Bradford has allies on the board, they'll come after you. Question your methods, your credentials, your motives. Let them. The evidence is clean. I didn't hack anything. I monitored authorized traffic and followed digital footprints that were already there. Everything I did was legal and documented. But corporate politics aren't about legality. They're about perception. And a black contractor accusing a white CFO of embezzlement. Emily's voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy between them. Jake had already considered this angle. In a just world, the evidence would be evaluated on merit alone. But the world wasn't just, and he'd spent enough years navigating predominantly white corporate spaces to know how quickly competence could be reframed as aggression when it came from someone who looked like him. Still, the alternative was silence, and silence was complicity. His voice came level, resolved. I know what I'm walking into, but I've got something Bradford doesn't. The truth, and I've got you backing me. That's enough. Emily reached across the table and took his hand, a public gesture of solidarity that meant more than words. Then we do this together, and whatever happens, we face it together. They spent another hour refining the presentation, anticipating counter-arguments, building redundancy into their case. When they finally packed up to leave, the sun was setting over the Chicago River, painting the water in shades of orange and purple. Emily walked Jake to his car, neither of them in a hurry to separate. She stopped at the driver's side door, her expression vulnerable in the dying light. Jake, after tomorrow, after we expose Bradford, things are going to change. The company will be in crisis mode. The board might decide they need new leadership to stabilize things. I could lose my position. Or you could be exactly what they need, someone with integrity who wasn't part of the corruption. Or I could be collateral damage. Emily's voice steadied, accepting the risk. I just want you to know that whatever happens, I don't regret this. Meeting you, helping Lily, choosing to fight instead of hide. It's the first time in years I've felt like myself. Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Then it's already worth it. He kissed her, not the careful, tentative contact of their first kiss in the hospital parking garage, but something deeper. A commitment made without words, a promise that they were in this together regardless of consequence. When they pulled apart, Emily's eyes were bright with emotion she no longer bothered to hide. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll be there. Jake drove home as darkness settled over the city. When he walked into the apartment, Lily was already in her pajamas, sitting on the couch with Marcus watching a nature documentary about whales. She looked up when she heard him, her face brightening. Daddy, did you and E win your fight yet? Tomorrow, baby, the big fight is tomorrow. Marcus stood, gathering his jacket. I'll pick up Lily from school tomorrow. Take her to my place until you're done. You need to focus. Jake clasped his friend's shoulder. Thank you for everything. That's what family does. Marcus ruffled Lily's hair and headed for the door. Good luck tomorrow. Burn it all down. After Marcus left, Jake went through the evening routine with Lily. Brushing teeth, picking out clothes for school, reading a chapter from the book Emily had bought. When he tucked her into bed, she held onto his hand, preventing him from leaving. Daddy, I'm scared about my surgery. The admission caught him off guard. Lily had been so brave through every doctor's appointment, every test, every needle stick. Hearing her voice, the fear felt both devastating and necessary. He sat on the edge of her bed. That's okay. Being scared is normal. What specifically scares you? What if I don't wake up? What if I go to sleep and end up where Mommy is? Jake felt his heart crack. He could have offered false promises, told her nothing would go wrong, that everything would be fine. But Sarah had taught them both that honesty, even painful honesty, was the foundation of trust. I can't promise nothing will go wrong. The doctors are very good and the surgery works most of the time. But you're right. There's always risk. That's why it's called being brave. You feel the fear and you do it anyway because the alternative is worse. Lily's eyes were wide in the darkness. What's the alternative? Not living fully, not getting to grow up and see the world and become whoever you're going to be. The surgery gives you the chance to have a whole life, and that's worth being scared for. Will you be there when I wake up? The second they let me in, I promise. Jake squeezed her hand. And so will E. She's already planning to take the day off work. Lily smiled at that, some of the fear easing. She really does care about us. She really does. Good, because I care about her too. Lily's voice was getting drowsy, sleep pulling at her. Daddy, if I do go where Mommy is, will you tell E I'm sorry I had to leave? Jake had to work to keep his voice steady. You're not going anywhere except into recovery and then back home. But yes, if anything happened, I'd tell her. Though she'd already know. She'd feel it. Lily's eyes drifted closed. Okay. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. More than all the stars. He stayed until her breathing evened into sleep, then walked into the living room and collapsed onto the couch. Tomorrow would determine multiple trajectories. His career, Emily's position, the company's future, possibly his freedom if Bradford's lawyers decided to twist the narrative. But underneath all of that was a simpler truth. He was fighting for the right thing. And if Sarah's death had taught him anything, it was that you couldn't control outcomes, you could only control choices, and he'd chosen to fight. Jake pulled out his phone and sent a message to Emily. Thank you for today. Lily loved meeting you. So did I. The response came quickly. She's extraordinary, like her father. I'll see you tomorrow. We've got this. Jake looked at the photograph of Sarah on the shelf, her smile frozen in time. He spoke to her the way he had for 3 years, knowing she couldn't answer, but needing to say the words anyway. I'm falling for someone, Sarah, and it terrifies me. Not because I'm betraying you, I know you'd want this, but because caring this much gives the universe another hostage, another person who can be taken away, another piece of my heart that can be shattered. He paused, then continued softer. But Lily is right. Love doesn't run out. It just gets bigger. So I'm going to try. I'm going to let Emily in. And I'm going to trust that you're watching, that you're okay with this, that somewhere in whatever comes after, you're proud of the man I'm trying to be. The apartment remained silent, but Jake felt a loosening in his chest, a permission granted not by supernatural intervention but by his own willingness to forgive himself for surviving when she didn't. He stood, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Jake woke at 5, showered, dressed in his best approximation of business attire, dark pants, the black button-down, the leather messenger bag. He made breakfast for Lily and himself, going through the familiar routine with mechanical precision. His mind was already at the high-rise, already walking into that boardroom, already facing down Bradford's calculated charm. He dropped Lily at school with extra hugs and reminders that Uncle Marcus would pick her up. Then he drove to the building, parked in the garage, and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. He arrived at 8:30, early enough to set up the presentation, late enough that the executive suite was already buzzing with speculation about the emergency meeting. Emily was waiting in the boardroom when he arrived. She wore a charcoal suit with a jade blouse, her hair pulled back severely, her expression composed into executive authority. But when their eyes met, he saw the human underneath. Nervous, determined, trusting him to hold up his end. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Jake connected his laptop to the projection system and queued up the evidence. Emily reviewed her notes one final time. At 8:55, the board members began to file in, curious, annoyed at the disruption, speculating in low voices about the purpose of this unscheduled session. William Bradford entered last, his silver hair impeccably styled, his suit tailored to perfection. He greeted James with a handshake, exchanged pleasantries with other board members, played the role of concerned senior executive wondering what emergency could possibly require such urgent attention. His eyes landed on Jake setting up the technical equipment, and something flickered in his expression: calculation, assessment, dismissal. To Bradford, Jake was just the IT contractor, invisible, irrelevant. That would be his mistake. At exactly 9, James called the meeting to order. His voice carried the weight of someone who didn't appreciate games. This session was called by Emily Carson under emergency protocols. Emily, you have the floor. This had better be worth everyone's time. Emily stood, her posture perfect, her voice steady. It is, sir. I've uncovered evidence of systematic embezzlement from corporate accounts. The theft spans 2 years and totals $4.3 million. The evidence is comprehensive and verifiable, and it implicates someone in this room. The atmosphere shifted instantly from annoyed to electric. Board members sat forward. Bradford's expression remained neutral, but Jake watched his hands. They'd gone still on the table, no longer drumming the casual rhythm from moments before. Emily nodded to Jake. He hit the first slide. The projection screen filled with account numbers, transfer records, shell company registrations. Every document was labeled with timestamps and source verification. The evidence built itself, money moving from infrastructure budgets to dummy corporations, funneling through Cayman accounts, ultimately landing in offshore holdings registered to aliases. Jake spoke for the first time, his voice calm and factual. These transfers occurred on dates when only executive-level credentials could authorize them. I've traced the digital signatures back to their source. The authorization came from CFO William Bradford's secure terminal. Every eye in the room turned to Bradford. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and offered a small, condescending smile, the expression of someone about to deploy a prepared defense. This is quite the accusation, Emily. I assume you have more than circumstantial digital footprints from an IT contractor with unknown motivations? Emily's voice didn't waver. I have signed documentation from 3 forensic auditing firms who've reviewed the evidence independently. I have SEC filings that show discrepancies in reported versus actual infrastructure spending. And I have recorded conversations between you and Robert Anderson discussing how to liquidate assets before the quarterly review. She placed a small recording device on the table. Would you like me to play those? Bradford's composure cracked, just a hairline fracture but visible. Recorded without consent, inadmissible in any legal proceeding. Not inadmissible in a board vote. Emily turned to James. Sir, I'm formally recommending immediate suspension of CFO Bradford pending criminal investigation. The evidence supports charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. If we don't act now, we're complicit. James's face had gone stone. He looked at Bradford, decades of professional relationship weighing against the evidence projected on the screen. William, I'm going to give you one chance to explain this. Bradford stood, his silver hair catching the light, his suit perfectly tailored. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 30 years at executive levels. James, this is a witch hunt orchestrated by someone desperate to distract from her own inadequacies. Emily has been gunning for my position since she joined the executive team. Now she's fabricated evidence and recruited a contractor to legitimize it. Look at him. Bradford gestured dismissively toward Jake. No credentials beyond a 3-month contract, no corporate standing, and conveniently positioned to discover exactly what Emily needed to eliminate her competition. The racial coding was subtle but unmistakable. Conveniently positioned, no standing. The implication: Jake was a tool, easily manipulated, his technical expertise less credible because of who he was. Jake had been waiting for this. He stood, his voice cutting through Bradford's performance with factual precision. Mr. Bradford, every piece of evidence I compiled came from authorized network monitoring. I didn't hack anything, I didn't fabricate anything, I traced patterns that already existed. Your shell companies were registered on public record, your transfers were documented in legitimate banking systems. The only thing I did was connect the dots that were already there. He clicked to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of Bradford's personal financial disclosures versus the offshore account deposits. The timing was identical. The amounts matched within percentages that accounted for exchange rates and transfer fees. Jake continued, his tone never rising, never becoming emotional. You made 3 mistakes, Mr. Bradford. First, you used corporate Wi-Fi to access your offshore accounts. Second, you registered your shell companies using a law firm that specializes in executive embezzlement cases. The FBI monitors their client list. Third, you assume no one was paying attention because people like me are supposed to be invisible. The boardroom was silent. Bradford's face had gone from confident to calculating to pale. He looked around the table, finding no support, no friendly eyes. Finally, his gaze landed on James. James, we've known each other for 20 years. You're going to believe these two over our history? James's voice came cold and final. I believe evidence, William, and the evidence is damning. Security, please escort Mr. Bradford from the building. His credentials are suspended immediately. The board will convene this afternoon to vote on termination and criminal referral. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway, summoned by James via silent message during the presentation. They approached Bradford, who stood frozen for a moment before reality settled in. His career was over. His freedom was in jeopardy. Everything he'd built through decades of maneuvering had collapsed in 15 minutes. As the guards led him toward the door, Bradford stopped and turned back to Emily. His voice came low, meant only for her. You just destroyed this company's reputation. The stock will plummet. Employees will suffer. All because you needed to prove something. Emily met his eyes without flinching. No, William. You destroyed it when you stole from it. I'm just refusing to help you cover it up. There's a difference. Bradford was escorted out. The boardroom erupted in controlled chaos. Members demanding answers, legal counsel being summoned, damage control strategies being proposed. James called for order and announced a 2-hour recess while leadership determined next steps. As the room cleared, he approached Emily and Jake. His voice carried a mix of respect and warning. You did the right thing, but this will get messy. The press will have questions. Shareholders will demand accountability. You both need to be prepared for scrutiny. Emily nodded. We understand. James turned to Jake, studying him with new attention. Mr. Mitchell, your contract was supposed to end this week, but I think we need someone with your particular skills on a more permanent basis. The title is Chief Security Officer. The salary is $240,000 plus benefits and stock options. Your daughter's medical expenses will be covered under executive family health care. Are you interested? Jake felt the offer land, not just financial security, but validation. Recognition that competence mattered more than credentials, that doing the right thing could actually be rewarded instead of punished. His voice came steady. Yes, sir, I'm interested. Good. HR will have paperwork ready by end of day. Welcome to the executive team. James shook both their hands and left the boardroom. When they were finally alone, Emily turned to Jake, her composure finally cracking into something that looked like relief and exhaustion and triumph. We did it. You did it. I just provided the technical support. Don't diminish yourself. You risked everything to do this, your contract, your reputation. Her voice caught. Your freedom, if Bradford's lawyers had managed to flip the narrative. Jake stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Some things are worth the risk. Emily's eyes searched his face. Like what? Like knowing I can look my daughter in the eye and tell her the truth won. He paused, then added softer. Like knowing I found someone who makes me want to be brave again. Emily closed the remaining distance and kissed him, right there in the boardroom with the evidence of their battle still projected on the screen behind them. It was the kind of kiss that marked a turning point, that acknowledged everything unspoken between them was now being spoken through action. When they finally pulled apart, Emily rested her forehead against his. Lily is having surgery Friday. I know. I want to be there, not as your boss, not as the CEO, as... She hesitated, searching for the right word. Jake supplied it. As family. Emily's smile was small but genuine, no trace of the sad lady Lily had first drawn. As family. They left the boardroom together, walking out into the executive suite where assistants were already fielding press inquiries and shareholders were demanding statements. The crisis had only just begun. Weeks of investigations, media scrutiny, corporate restructuring. But for the first time in 3 years, Jake felt something other than the weight of survival. He felt hope, and standing beside him, Emily looked like she felt it too. His phone buzzed, a text from Lily sent from the school nurse's phone. "Did you win, Daddy?" Jake typed back, "We won, baby. I'll tell you everything tonight." The response came quickly. "I knew you would. You're my hero." Jake slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked at Emily. "You ready for what comes next?" Emily took his hand, a public gesture that would spark speculation and gossip and a dozen HR conversations. But she didn't let go. "With you, yes." They walked toward the elevators, toward the future, toward whatever complicated, beautiful mess came from choosing truth over convenience. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe still had grace left to offer.